So I think we've been pretty capital markets focused today and somewhat product focused. I may try to kind of widen the lens. So what's wrong with planet Earth today? Lots of things. And there's lots of things going well, but I would argue that many people aren't stakeholders in humanity. We've got an overwhelming majority of planet Earth that earns less than $2 a day. What about a world where we could actually have tokenized, digitized equity, and essentially everyone can own a stake in everyone else's project that's tangibly incentivized to essentially root for all of our communal success? So I believe this could essentially thaw liquidity and increase creation and reduce destruction. This gentleman, Ronald Coase, was a Nobel laureate, and his foundational research was about essentially the nature of the firm, why people come together and create companies for essentially economies of scope, economies of scale. And I think we are on verge of essentially turning this concept on its head, where we see banks that are reducing their headcount. And I think that what we're going to start to see is essentially shrinking the optimal size for engagement down to the individual. So, would you rather, as the majority of Earth, be a burger flipper, or start engaging in essentially gamified behavioral economics that increase your willingness to participate in this societal enterprise? So I think we've started to figure out a way to get there. So we've been doing kind of blockchain 101 and 201 and 301 and 401 all day, but I won't really dive into this, but you'll understand that basically what we're doing is commoditizing the way humans agree. I'm from a firm named ConsenSys. It's short for ConsenSys Systems, all about agreements. So the internet that we know now commoditized how humans communicate, and we're basically now taking the next step to commoditize how we trust each other, how we agree with each other. So I'd argue that the internet that we know now has been great. It's led us pretty far, but it's broken. And we've seen the internet that really started for the formulation and the dissemination of research papers now become pervasive to hacking, to specific leaks. And now we've seen these honeypots of data. And what we're going to see now with the tokenization of assets, the automation of our agreements, and the notion of self-sovereign digital identity. So every time you log into your own personal browser, it's not Mark or Sergey getting paid. You may attract your attention to something, and you may get paid $1 a day for being in a social network. And what we're going to see is essentially the price discovery mechanism for the value of intermediation. What does the middle man or woman bring to the table in every transaction? Is there value that they're creating, or are they essentially inserting themselves and extracting an inordinate amount of value? So just a few types of examples that we're building. One is called Ujo Music. We all log into iTunes, and I think iTunes is a great example of an intermediary that does add value. It becomes they've got a great user experience. They do a great amount of kind of marketing for the artist. But imagine a place where we can essentially purchase a song peer-to-peer, and then Apple iTunes doesn't extract 35 to 40% and the artist doesn't get paid, 6 to 9 months later. And the interesting thing here is what we did was we created essentially stems, music stems, where if there was a rock band and there's 5 people in the rock band, you could have a smart contract that could disseminate that money in real time. So if we buy an album for $10, the guitarist gets paid 20%, the bass player gets paid 20%, piano, etc. And that happens in real time. But the more interesting thing that I think that we start seeing is part of that, through things like Harbor that Josh was creating, you could have the way to basically invest in this band. And then maybe 10% of that money could go to the investor. And you start blurring the lines between being part of the band or just being kind of this external fan. Similarly, we're doing the same thing with trying to combat fake news with a newsroom called Civil. So what I think we're going to have here, I think this is important, so that we're essentially on the flat part of the curve, and we are starting to see exponential technology booms. And basically, we are thinking linearly, but this is all going to have essentially a multiplier effect. So a few words about the bullshit sharing economy. Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, you can say it about Amazon, Facebook, et al., essentially provide the same things. Identity, a payment rail, reputation, kind of those 5 stars at the end, and they extract tremendous value for that thin intermediary rail. And basically what we believe that these intermediaries should evolve into are n-sided, infinitely sided marketplaces. You can essentially take out Uber in the middle. Well, first off, we're going to be logging into our own self-sovereign browser. What's your name? Brandon. So Brandon's going to log into the Brandon browser. The Brandon browser is going to have essentially a biometric, maybe a thumbprint, iris scan. That's going to house his reputation in the form of attributes, so facts and opinions, attestations. So maybe a blood type on one side, maybe something like a credit score, or how many, or his reputation and the equivalent of an Uber ride. What's interesting now is basically all of this reputation is siloed. So if we take 10,000 Uber rides and we want to go on an Airbnb, that reputation essentially isn't portable. So we're going to have this essential canonical persona that can choose to granularly give out information. I give the example about a woman that walks into a bar. Every time they go in to be intoxicated, potentially, they're essentially giving the bouncer where they live. All they really need is the proof of their age, not necessarily to show where they live when every time they hand their driver's license. So I think this is kind of an important concept to understand, that we can granularly authenticate and give that information out. So essentially, we have this multi-sided marketplace where we have this self-sovereign browser, and we create a marketplace for various actors. So you'll have the driver that can touch the smart contract. You could have an insurer that writes a micro insurance policy per ride. That's important. This is very kind of granular. It's per ride. It doesn't have to be an annual insurance policy. You can have a lessor that deducts a piece of what is owed on the car based on the ride as well. So a few other places that we're actually working on this is in the energy industry. So as we start tokenizing all assets, oil, gold, one aspect that we're tokenizing is electrons. So basically, you can imagine Alice living in a house with a solar panel on her roof. The sun shines. We take that energy, we create a digital representation of that electron, and we can sell that peer-to-peer to Bob. We're doing this through a project called Grid Plus. It's actually live in Texas, where people can buy wholesale tokenized energy. Another project that we're doing is called Open Law, where we have actual legally enforceable smart contract agreements. So my position is that the agreements we have now are typically drafted by attorneys in Microsoft Word, and if there is a breach of that contract, we can't essentially encumber the asset that is potentially breached. So now, with these digitized assets in these automated agreements, we're going to have much more fluidity. We're going to have real-time agreements. You can create things like employment agreements by the minute. You can have a food stamp that forbids you to buy alcohol or cigarettes programmatically. This creates a whole new world of agreements. So for the nation state, we're taking the concepts of society and essentially digitizing them. So things like money, our agreements, title, and basically this is going to create a borderless economy that we've never seen before, and it is going to thaw liquidity tremendously. So I'm from a place called ConsenSys. We are the largest software engineering shop specifically dedicated to blockchain technology. We really operate under 4 main pillars: product, enterprise and government consulting, education, and capital. So on the product side of the house, we are a full stack engineering shop. We maintain 3 of the 8 implementations of the Ethereum protocol: the .NET client, the Haskell client, the Java client. Above that, we build developer tools. Sophie's here from Kaleido, which is our blockchain as a service developer tool. We've also created Truffle, which is the most used smart contract development tool in the world. We also have created essentially Akamai for blockchain. It's called Infura, handles something like 9-10 billion requests per day. Above that, we create standards. So this is kind of an important, when we talk about kind of the pattern recognition that the gentleman was just talking about. So for those of you who are old enough to remember when Java became J2EE, Java 2 Enterprise Edition, that's when it became the most permeated software language in the world. It's because it had clean web API standards and clean database API standards. So we think that's extremely important. So token standards. So we've heard about the ERC20 token standard today. So we help build those types of standards around identity, reputation, token issuance, and management. So we build that. And then lastly, we have the application layer, and we run that in a venture studio model. On the enterprise and government consulting side of the house, we are working with the European Union to essentially elucidate use cases from proof of concept into production. So basically, all of the EU comes to Brussels and basically helps, and we help them to, excuse me. So basically, we elucidate these proofs of concept from proofs of concept into production. So we're also doing that with the Emirate of Dubai, Microsoft, JP Morgan, Santander, British Petroleum, large companies and governments. Next, we have education, where we educate engineers, and we also educate subject matter experts like blockchain for lawyers. So with that, I think I'm going to take questions.
Thank you very much, and a wonderful talk. I saw on your note that you're very good at healthcare system. So we haven't talked anything about this topic.
Healthcare?
No. I want to ask your thought about the recent the blockchain system for the pharmaceutical. For instance, like George Hurd here from Harvard, studied labeler, genomic and trading DNA, genomic data, and how the from your model, I find the CRO, Contract Research Organization, become the intermediator and almost like drawing the the cash and funding from the in-house service to external offshore or outside vendors. I wonder how you look into using your wonderful technology platform to help to advance or accelerate the new drug development in the pharmaceutical industry.
So I don't know about that specific use case, but basically what we are doing is tracking provenance, so the chain of custody and authenticity of an asset from essentially the creator to the wholesaler to the retailer to what we ingest in terms of our pharmaceuticals. We're working specifically with GlaxoSmithKline so we can actually figure out and prove the authenticity of the ingredients that go into pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. So coming from the consumer perspective,
yes, sir.
Or the end users, I'm envisaging a point where I have to practically manage everything. For example, I need a coupon that doesn't permit alcohol, but then I also need one that permits alcohol. I have to figure out how to get get practically everything I need to get eventually because I bear the liabilities and I bear everything, so to say.
So what you're talking about is essentially a badging system, and I think the notion of badging is going to be a very prominent. So in the capital markets and specifically the security token space, one of the badges that are being created is that of an accredited investor. So having to prove whether you have a $200,000 income or a certain net worth, you're going to have other types of badges of being able to participate in certain type of networks. So this is all about that kind of portable reputation via badging. Yes.
Thank you. I was just wondering, you spoke before about facts versus attestations and this reputation system. So I'm wondering, how do you formalize the process of getting someone's opinion on someone else? Do you have a system that you're looking towards or thoughts on? What does it mean formally to measure one's opinion on someone else regarding a topic?
It's a great question. We haven't formalized that process, and nor do I represent that we're specifically doing it. I think it's just kind of part of this burgeoning ecosystem. I think there are going to be kind of mediation processes where if people can object to the reputation they're given. And when you get into kind of the GDPR issues and right to be forgotten, as well as kind of like the right to be forgiven. If someone did something for a certain amount of time, if there's a bankruptcy and after a certain duration of time, they are essentially not bankrupt anymore, if they've complied with it, how to essentially erase those attributes from the blockchain, which these are problems that are not yet solved.
That's very interesting. And I just mentioned it was a bit of a loaded question too because I'm at a startup that's trying to formalize opinion ranking measurements.
Cool.
Yep.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So, what do you think about like the big data brokers like MyLife.com stuff that assign people these essentially these trustworthy scores or whatever they call them? Like they get buy data from you.
So I mean, I think that this is and whether you talk about MyLife.com or Facebook.com, I mean, I think this is the issue that everyone's having right now, that we are the product. And I think that if you get to that place of a self-sovereign browser with behavioral economic incentives, like you get paid $1 a day to look at the advertising instead of Mark, and you own that data, cryptographically secured, that's going to be where we go. But I mean, these are incumbents with lots of money that have extremely large network effects. So that's going to be part of the process.
The behavioral economic model you described and the sovereignty of the individual browser that you illustrate,
yes,
I equate with a more Western, individualistic, hierarchical structure, or lack of a hierarchical structure.
Okay.
How do you envision these capabilities being adopted by other cultures or other societies that are much more hierarchically structured?
Great question. There's already been issues in China with some of this, as an example. I don't know. To be completely honest, I don't know how that's going to happen in places where there's kind of restriction on what's seen, what's not seen, specifically like in surveillance of things like WhatsApp. I don't have the answer for that.
Question. So earlier in the presentation, you made a juxtaposition between burger flippers and people who are participating in some gamified economy. How does leadership at ConsenSys kind of reconcile the fact that like participants in a gamified economy are effectively new burger flippers that are just kind of following or performing a specific task in order to receive money for the task. And a second kind of mini question past that, with the whole like choice and the what is it, the Brandon browser, what have you.
Yeah.
Have there been, I guess, has there been research done to figure out whether or not the economics of giving end users choice to kind of view the ads changes the payment, like the value of those ads, because end users, given the opportunity to play around with the I guess the valves, will try to gamify and increase and therefore poison the value of these of their ad consumption?
So on the first part of the question, the point I was trying to make is that what this is doing is creating new opportunities that we think that people will want to participate in versus what they're forced to participate in. So there's a whole new job market, if you will, aside from just the opportunities that are being created in this whole new economy. Is there research on the essential watching of specific advertisements? I don't believe so yet. That was just a proposal of what a social network could look like. Thank you, guys.